2.5 Admins, episode 14. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. And up front, you want to plug your summary of the OpenZFS Dev Summit, Alan.
Yeah, over on my company's website, I wrote up a summary of each of the talks and all the interesting stuff that happened. So if you head over there and check it out, it was a good time, a lot of interesting stuff. During Matt's opening session, he also talked about basically all the stuff that's going to be in the next release of OpenZFS 2.0. And it was interesting to see almost every one of them had been presented at a previous OpenZFS Dev Summit, or the other three big headline features were being presented this year. And the videos for all the talks are online now as well. All linked in my summary there. So check them out.
Okay, well, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. And do you want to plug All Things Open then, Jim?
Absolutely. All Things Open. It opens up Monday, October 19th and Tuesday, October 20th. Last year and the long ago before time when people attended conferences in person, we had over 5,000 attendees. This year, everything is all virtual, and we're expecting somewhere between 10 and 15,000. It's going to be a good time.
Okay, cool. Well, let's start with some news then. And the first one is almost unbelievable to me. And that is that a bunch of COVID tests were lost by the UK authorities because instead of using a database, they were storing them in an Excel spreadsheet, and not even an XLSX. It was the old school 20-year-old version of Excel.
Right, a database.
You mean 40-year-old version, right? The .xls file format dates back to 1987, and that's why it only allows you to have 65,000 rows.
That is almost as old as me. That's unbelievable.
So I was reading the article, and they're talking about like the companies that would do the test would upload basically a CSV file, a text file that Excel can open. So my question was like, did they just chuck those files when they were done? Like, how did they actually lose the data? Like, I can understand why when they imported it into Excel, it might not have all been there. It might not have been included in the reports. But for the data to be lost would mean they would have to like thrown away the incoming data after they thought they plugged it into their Excel, which just doesn't make any sense.
I mean, these are folks who are trying to keep track of an entire country's COVID testing with an Excel spreadsheet. Nothing really seems out of the question here.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just like you keep your constituent files, even if it's just a backup. There's some CSV files. It's not like they were taking a lot of space.
So look, Alan, I mean, so every day they upload the new CSVs and they take the thumb drive and they erase it and they put the next day's CSV on it. What don't you understand here?
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of database should they have been using here?
Any.
I mean, even as like,
Any.
like a MySQL would be good enough, right?
MySQL, a fucking SQLite, anything would have been fine.
MySQL, Postgres, God, even just be blasphemous and go with Microsoft SQL, just like an actual relational database, please. Or possibly non-relational. I'm not entirely sure what the data looked like.
They could have even just been using Microsoft Access.
No.
It's not really, no, I don't suggest that, but...
No.
At least it's not Excel. Excel is not a database. This should be the fucking name of the program. Like when you launch it, it should be Excel is not a database.
Yeah. Yeah, you will suggest that to Microsoft, eh?
I don't get what you don't understand, Alan. It's the database spreadsheet. Come on, man.
But this is common, right? This
Yes.
is not some unique one-off thing.
Right. I'm sure somebody thought it was a good idea to make the file just .xls rather than the newer XLSX because it's more compatible, not realizing that it meant that each sheet could only have 65,000 rows in it.
But what I mean is it's pretty common for people to use spreadsheets when they should be using a database.
Incredibly common. That's why I keep making these silly jokes about, what don't you understand? It's the database spreadsheet.
Well, because a lot of times the problem with if you just have a database is you don't have a reasonable UI for people to do stuff to it. And people have to think a lot harder to write an SQL query to select certain rows than to do the filtering in Excel and so on. Part of the problem is using the legacy Excel format limited the number of rows, whereas if they'd used the newer one from 2007 or whatever, which it turns out is basically just some XML files zipped up together in the end, it supports, I think, up to 1 million rows per file or sheet or whatever, and probably wouldn't have been a problem. But, that's not really the point here. The point is they really... for something like this, should have had a database. And we're not talking like they needed to spend $1 million on consultants to design a database. Like anything can import CSV files.
Yeah. They needed an actual developer involved for a project this size is kind of what it boils down to. Like one probably would have been sufficient. If it, if it was somebody with a decent grasp on, the back end and enough front end, one developer might very well have been enough, but just clearly there wasn't really on the IT side of things, there weren't any grownups in the room.
Yeah.
Somebody just took, some people doing their jobs and said, hey, track the entire country's COVID testing and, just sort of let them be. And when you do that, a giant Excel spreadsheet is what you end up with. That's what happens every single time.
All right. Well, something you wrote about was AMD's new Zen 3 Ryzen desktop CPUs.
Yeah, they look pretty exciting. We're having a really good back and forth this year between AMD and Intel. For a while now, it's basically just been Intel going, hey, guys, we've got really fast single-threaded performance. I hear you gamers like that. And just kind of generally getting their asses kicked beyond that. But Intel came back really well with the Tiger Lake laptop CPUs, and now AMD is coming back with the next generation of desktop CPUs, and they have taken all of the performance crowns away. They are faster single-threaded. Both the Ryzen 7 and Ryzen 9 are faster than the i9-10900K, which up until now was Intel's fastest single-threaded and fastest multi-threaded, desktop processor. I should be fair, I'm going on AMD's own testing here. I haven't had one of these devices, in my own hands to test, but it's been quite a while now that AMD has produced pretty detailed tests, and they have been, dead on when you get devices to test in your own lab. So right now, I don't really have a whole lot of problem believing them when they say they've taken the crown on single-threaded and multi-threaded, and both the Ryzen 7 and the Ryzen 9 are beating Intel's i9-10900K, let alone the lower spec CPUs.
And the backwards compatibility is pretty good with old motherboards, isn't it?
It is. We're kind of going to have to see how that really goes, but we're broadly expecting with BIOS updates, all AMD 550 chipsets, motherboards should be fine with the new processors. And AMD has been a little cagier on the 450 chipsets, but they have said that basically they've made the code available to all the motherboard vendors, but it will just be a question of, which vendors actually prioritize that to allow those boards to take the newer processors.
Yeah, basically with the older motherboards, it's up to the motherboard manufacturer to decide if they want to make a BIOS update or try to convince you to buy a new motherboard instead. And, the ones that do it might, get that extra consideration next time. For when I'm buying my next board, is the board going to last a bit longer because they actually do bother with the BIOS updates beyond getting my money.
Yeah.
But also, looking at the kind of iterative growth, when was the last time we saw a 19% IPC improvement from an Intel generation?
Ooh, I don't think we've seen 19% IPC gen on gen from anybody for about 15 years, maybe 20 now.
I think Sandy Bridge or something was about that. But yeah, it was 10 generations ago for Intel.
Yeah.
And Intel's still stuck on the old 10 nanometer, right?
That's true, but I'm not even sure I'd phrase it that way. It's not even so much that they're stuck on 10 nanometers, that they're still growing into it. Tiger Lake was really the first generation that I would say Intel had kind of comfortably gotten a real win on with 10 nanometer. Ice Lake was also 10 nanometer, but the clock speeds were low and they didn't perform all that well, and Intel had trouble producing many of them. So I don't, like I said, I don't think it's so much a case of they're still stuck on it as they're still growing into it.
Meanwhile, Apple are launching the iPhone 12 with a 5 nanometer, which, okay, that's different. It's ARM and everything, but still it shows how far behind Intel are.
Yeah, and AMD says that their 5 nanometer is well on track also.
Yeah, and then looking at some of the other stats here, the power numbers are starting to remind me of the old Pentium 4 days, where the AMD CPUs were just so much better performance per watt than the Intel ones.
Yeah, and they're TDPs you can actually trust as well.
Well, yes and no. I mean, neither one of them. When you're talking about desktop CPUs and not laptop CPUs, the TDP is kind of BS from either camp, but it's a lot closer on AMD's side to the spec than it is on Intel's side. When you look at the newer 105 watt TDP chips, whether we're talking about the last generation or whether we're talking about the upcoming Zen 3, it's 105 watt thermal design power, but if you have adequate cooling, you can actually pull, I believe they set up to 142 watts consistent, which that tracks with what I've seen. Now, with that said, I've seen Intel chips with 125 watt TDP, and granted, I'm usually looking at, power draw at the wall, but I've seen Intel 125 watt TDP systems that are doing a processor test, and, there's not anything else going on that would be drawing any power anywhere else, but, like 335 watts. So it's a really big difference. You're at least within shouting distance of the stated TDP on the AMD side when you're on, all core boost for long periods of time with enough cooling.
I was interested to see that the pricing has gone up. It's like AMD just don't care anymore. They're saying we're better all round and we're going to charge you for it now.
Well, I mean, they are, and why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Well, and when they still have the lower models in the pipeline, they have old units they might as well sell. Like, if you need the higher performance, you're going to pay for it. They're definitely not in the same position they were in before where they really needed to get back market share. Now they're like, we're literally just the market leader.
Exactly. And I mean, I would argue that there's still one hell of a value, because when if you look at the Ryzen 5 and the upcoming Zen 3 series, it's supposed to retail for $300. Well, it's hanging with the Intel i7. $300 does not seem like a big ask for, a CPU that is on par with the Intel i7, better in some cases.
Okay. This episode is sponsored by Datadog, the monitoring and analytics platform for comprehensive visibility into your Linux environment. By uniting metrics and events from servers, databases, applications, and more, Datadog can easily give you a unified view into your entire infrastructure. Easily identify hidden sources of latency, like overloaded hosts, by monitoring server metrics alongside application data. With machine learning-based alerts and features like anomaly detection, Datadog can also help you to monitor and alert on the health of your servers in real time without alert fatigue. Start your Datadog trial today by visiting datadog.com/25admins. Start your trial, create one dashboard, and you'll get a free Datadog t-shirt. That's datadog.com/25admins. You wrote a very interesting article recently called "Yesterday's Corporate Network Design Isn't Working for Working from Home."
Everybody right now is trying to transition from this model where 95+% of the employees come into, fixed office buildings every day and sit their butts in physical chairs and work with, locally attached resources, to moving to this dispersed model where people work from home or a coffee shop or, wherever. But the point is they're not coming into an office. And the resources haven't magically just all moved out to the cloud. You still end up having to move data in and out of those physical buildings, where your application and your file servers are. And just people weren't really set up for it for the most part. I mean, you still have tons of businesses that have asymmetrical residential style pipes, like 200 down and 20 up, which is exactly balanced the wrong way, because now the vast majority of their data needs to be uploaded out of the office, not downloaded into it. So it's been kind of a struggle adapting.
If you're moving towards the cloud, maybe you already got slightly fatter pipes, but outside of that, you just were not set up for that many people to be working from home. And then you get the whole separate things of just the security posture and trying to define what's inside your network versus outside, or, what devices people use to connect to the corporate network. And it just gets a lot different really quickly when suddenly everybody's not coming into the office. And, even just support-wise, people aren't on a network that the IT support team knows. Right. So you got everybody working from home calling corporate IT support saying, hey, I can't connect to work's stuff. And it's like, well, I have to debug everybody's home network now. That'll be fun.
Yeah, because before you'd have a few people VPNing in, but most people would be physically there, whereas now it's completely the opposite. And so handling that traffic coming in, you can't just do that on some terrible old router or whatever. You need specific hardware for it.
Again, the issue is not really the data that's coming into the corporate network. It's the data that's going out of the corporate network. Because when you're on the VPN, now almost all of your data is flowing out rather than flowing in, because your people are trying to access resources that are in the building and bring them outside the building one way or the other. Now there are better and worse ways to do that, and like personally, I've had clients that fall on both sides of that scale. I have CPA clients that were already, using like Microsoft Windows. They call it remote desktop servers now, but terminal servers where you've got you'll have 20 desktops served off of one machine, and its only job in life is for you to RDP into it. So everybody RDPs into the one box. They were already doing that, so it wasn't really much of a shift for them, to just have people not coming into the office because the bandwidth needs aren't really very big for RDP sessions.
Yeah, it's just compressed video mostly, isn't it?
Well, and RDP is even sometimes less compressed video and more the instructions to draw the same things on your screen. Like it's literally almost the API calls.
Yeah, correct. RDP is a really great protocol for what it does. It's not just compressed video. It understands objects. Like if you're dragging an icon around on the desktop or whatever, you can do a lot of that rendering locally. It just says, hey, the user dragged this icon, and you render that on your own machine. You just know the icon moved in this direction, and it treats it like a tile or a sprite. But anyway, where things go badly is I've also seen people who refuse to leave their machines in the office to RDP into. And we're like, no, I want to take my big engineering system and its multiple monitors and its everything else home with me. And I'm just going to download files, from the file server over the VPN and work on them at home. Or worse yet, people will even try to actually open like a big engineering project using Samba over a VPN directly, like on a mapped drive that's, going across a residential WAN link. And no, that does not go well at all. And what's even worse is not only does that, network model not work, but now this person has actually removed all of their infrastructure from the office. So now it's more difficult even to get them a situation which does work, like remote controlling that same machine. Because if they'd left the machine in the office, well, now all this massive data transfer from the, the office file server or application server to the workstation, it all still happens on the LAN. Everything's nice and snappy like it always was. All they have to do is remote control that machine.
I've definitely seen a lot of that with like the VDI stuff as well, where basically same thing, but you have some hypervisor somewhere and everybody that's connecting in has their own little VM with their desktop in it. It lets you do basically the same thing, but off one server or something in the data center rather than on the desk. And sometimes the point of that, like I imagine the same thing with the CPAs, like even when they're in the office, they're still connecting using that remote desktop or VDI type session is for auditing and monitoring, right? When you're dealing with banks, for example, they want to know what everybody did on every machine. Mm-hmm. And so every machine is really just a dumb terminal. Going back to one of these machines is actually locked down.
Yeah, there's a lot of good reasons for it. That's one. Another is, that way it makes sure that everybody's work is always being properly, hourly snapshotted and replicated off and, all those things that we harp on all the time on this show.
That brings up a point with the work from home. It's like how much of your company's useful data is now saved on random laptops and is not getting backed up every night.
And if you're doing VDI or RDP, like into remote desktop services server or into individual workstations, the answer is none of it because it all stayed in the office where you want it to be to begin with. Mm-hmm. But yeah, if you've got people that are just downloading files willy-nilly over the VPN, one, you've completely saturated the absolute crap out of that VPN and everything sucks. And two, like Alan said, now you don't know where all of your mission critical data is. Is it getting backed up? Is it being held securely in accordance, with your company's needs for confidentiality, whether it's mandated like HIPAA or whether it's just practical? Either way, you kind of don't know anymore. Now, in the case of something like HIPAA, hopefully you do know because you haven't allowed that to happen because regulations have made you say, hey, we can't do this. Hopefully.
Yeah, and that's the point, right? That we've got a training problem and budget problem fundamentally here, that companies don't want to spend money getting a consultant like you guys in to actually sort this out for them. So their staff that are barely trained to do this stuff are just muddling through and making a bunch of mistakes.
In a lot of cases, I don't even think it's so much that they don't want to hire a consultant to come in and sort things out for them as that they just don't have the experience with doing that. And, one of the issues that we haven't touched on yet is the fact that there may not be the resources available that they truly need for that. I mean, one of the things that you really ought to have is a symmetrical connection, and that's not always available. I live in a capital city of my state in the United States, and there are many business sectors in the city where there are no symmetrical options. There are many more where there is a symmetrical option, but it starts at like $1,500 a month, versus like $200 for a residential style 200 by 20.
Yeah, I ran into the same problem. When I first looked at getting a symmetrical connection here, the best offer I got was $10,000 a month.
That's why you became your own ISP.
Well, no, eventually I found an option that gave me a gigabit symmetrical for $1,500 a month.
Wow.
But, that's ridiculous. It's like 1.5 times what my mortgage is every month just for internet. But the best I could get off a residential connection was like 100 by 5. And, 5 megabits versus a gigabit is pretty hard to work with. And it's just the infrastructure it's just not been a priority for people to be able to upload, really. And especially like even if you're before work from home, just being able to use that much data towards the cloud was often something companies were needing. But now with everybody at home, people's home internet often probably needs more upload than they have. And, the corporate network needs a lot more than it has.
Your home network doesn't need more upload again if you're doing things properly with RDP or VDI, but
right, yes.
Yeah, if you're just dragging files back and forth and ugh.
But the other reason why I imagine more places aren't doing it that way is they just don't know that there's a better way to do it.
Right.
And yes, basically the RDP or VDI type thing is really the answer. And it's, if you think about it, it's what us sysadmins have been doing for ages with something like SSH. Use a lightweight protocol to connect to the machine and do all the work on the far side. Right? The files are over there and everything runs over there, and I'm just seeing an output of it.
Another thing that we haven't touched on is, but always comes up whenever anybody talks about this stuff is, we'll just move everything to the cloud and then problem solved. And it's, it's just not that freaking easy. There are some workloads that are already very cloud native. Like if you want to host, email for domain and groupware, well then by God, go out and get Office 365 or, Google Suite or, whatever they're calling it this week. And, problem solved. It's done. That's what everybody's already doing and it's fine and it's great. But if you're trying to run an engineering firm, if you're trying to run an accounting firm, if you're trying to run an architectural firm, that's just not really going to happen. I mean, there are so many industries out there that really absolutely rely on people running software locally installed on Windows PCs, with a central file server. And you can move all that out to the cloud as well, but that's a migration that I see botched horribly time and time again because you can't just move the centralized part out to the cloud. You've got to move the desktop side out to the cloud as well. And now you're doing just what Al and I have been talking about with VDI or RDP into virtual machines in the cloud that are on, they are local to your file server and application server in the cloud. So basically it's the exact same infrastructure you had in your office, but you've moved all of it out into the cloud. Well, first of all, that's not necessarily all that easy. Second of all, it usually costs a lot more money than keeping things inside the office. And then finally, you have got one hell of a nasty case of proprietary vendor lock-in once you've done that.
Yeah.
Because wherever you set up your virtual desktops and your virtual file server and everything else, it's not usually going to be the case. They're just going to be like, oh, hey, here's an easy way to download these images so you can upload them to somebody else's, if you need to swap providers later. So if those people start giving you terrible service, they don't have enough bandwidth to their data center, they have reliability and uptime problems, whatever, it's not going to be simple to fix. And in a lot of cases, you just plain can't fix it because you abstracted that away and it's no longer under your control.
If you try to move just the back end of it, then you have the same problem of now you're at the office accessing a mapped Samba share over a VPN to the cloud, and it's slow. Or if you move all the VDI stuff there, you have the first problem is, you have these big engineering files that you're changing every day. You can't just not work on them for a week while you wait for them to upload.
Yep.
There's not generally a great way to get large amounts of data up to the cloud. You don't have fast enough internet. There is an option from Amazon where you can mail them some hard drives and they'll load it up for you, but they don't offer the service in reverse. So if you ever want to get it out of there, you're going to be trickling it out at whatever internet speed you can get. Oh, and Amazon will charge you for the bandwidth on the way out too.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by TrueNAS from iXsystems. Go to TrueNAS.com. TrueNAS and FreeNAS have now unified as TrueNAS, the #1 open storage OS. TrueNAS uses the power and reliability of OpenZFS to bring open source economics to enterprise-grade unified storage with support for file, block, object, and app storage. You can use the free TrueNAS Core Edition or invest in a TrueNAS Enterprise system. Coming soon is TrueNAS Scale, which provides open hyperconverged infrastructure with support for Linux containers, and you can follow the development, try out, and contribute to this exciting project. Check out TrueNAS.com and see how TrueNAS can support your next storage project, whether it's just a few terabytes all the way up to multiple petabytes. That's TrueNAS.com. Let's do some free consulting then. If you want to send your questions in for Jim and Alan, you can do so show@2.5admins.com. And if you want to support creation of these episodes, you can do so on Patreon. There's details for that at 2.5admins.com. And thank you everyone who is supporting us. It's really appreciated. And for $5 or more, you can get an advert-free RSS feed. And we've also got this goal of $500 on there. And once we hit that, we'll go weekly with these episodes. So check that out and support us. So I'm afraid I've jumped the queue this week because I had a question for you guys. So sorry, everyone. So I have got this NAS. And I've got a couple of ZFS pools on it with 3 and 5 terabytes used. I've only got 4 gigs of RAM in it. It's a very low power Celeron system. Performance is not an issue for me. Now, I have got a bunch of backups on there which are horribly disorganized with backups of backups of backups. And there's a ton of duplicated files, I'm almost sure. So my question is, what's the best way to deal with that? Now, ZFS dedupe, my understanding of that is that if you enable deduplication, then you need a ton of RAM for that. I've only got 4 gigabytes in there. I've heard that you can possibly use an SSD for the table space, so I could do that, but maybe a simpler way. I've heard of that there's some tools that you can use to scan through and replace some of your duplicates with just either symlinks or hard links. So first of all, is deduplication on ZFS still a bad idea unless you've got ridiculous amounts of RAM?
It's usually a bad idea, even if you do have ridiculous amounts of RAM.
Right.
Basically, bad idea altogether. Don't do that. Plus, in your case, it's not going to help because it's online only. So it only dedupes as you write the data. So unless you're going to refill all your 8 terabytes of data on, it's not going to do anything except for when you start writing new data, and it's not even going to match the old data. So you have to add 2 more copies before you get any benefit. The upside of dedupe is that it's block level. So it's every, in ZFS by default, every 128K. So if you have 2 files that are mostly the same, but, in the later backup, it's changed slightly, the parts of it that are the same will still dedupe. Whereas using some program to actually just look at your files, find ones that have the same checksum and replace them with a hard link or a symlink will only work if the files are entirely exactly identical.
Right. Okay. But you think that dedupe's generally a bad idea. So what's the tool that I should be using for this job then?
So there's a tool called RDFind. It's in the Ubuntu main repositories, and it does exactly what you want it to do. It scans your system and it looks for files that are the same size, and then it will check them for matching MD5 sums. And you can tell it what you want to do when it finds them, whether it's just tell you, what the dupes are in an output text file, whether you want it to delete some dupes, whether you want to replace, copies with hard links. It'll do any of those things. I'm not super familiar with its day-to-day use, but I know that's the answer and it's out there.
Yeah. The only caveat I would put is that you can't make hard links across separate file systems. So if you have separate ZFS pools, or if you've done separate data sets, then they'll have to be symlinks rather than hard links.
I'm not fully familiar with the difference between hard links and symlinks, to be honest. Like, what's the difference?
So you have to understand that a file is both data and metadata, right?
Yeah.
And the metadata points you to where the blocks of the actual data for the file live.
Yeah.
What a hard link is a copy of just the metadata pointing to those same data blocks.
Right.
Whereas a symlink actually points to both the metadata and the data for the file.
Right.
A hard link, there's actually no such thing as an original when you have 2 hard links to a file. It doesn't work that way. They're both equally valid. And with a symlink, if you remove the original file, then the remaining symlink is useless. It does nothing. But with a hard link, if you remove either side of the hard link, you haven't changed anything.
Right.
The other thing that tends to catch people up on that is not realizing that because the hard links both point to the same set of data, if you edit one or the other hard link, it doesn't matter which one because you're still changing the underlying data on both of them.
Right.
Which might not be what you want with a backup. For already taken backups is one thing, but if you end up doing this on, say, the directory where you're writing new backups to, like if you're just using, I think you're using rsync or something to do your backups, right?
Yeah.
So if you're doing it to the target directory, then if you've got a bunch of different directories of these backups, if you update the one you're about to put the new rsync against with a hard link, then if it updates that file, it's going to update the copy in your backup from 2 weeks ago.
Yes and no. Keep in mind that by default, rsync does not modify files in place.
Right.
By default, rsync creates a new file and it removes the old file once it's done with the new one. And that's exactly the behavior that you want with hard links. You have to actually, rsync can also update files in place, but you have to actually use the in place option, which very few people do. If you use in place, then yes, you'll change it on both ends. Rsync in its default behavior, if you have two directories, each of which contains a hard link to the same file, then what will happen is it will update where you rsync into by creating a new file and then removing that hard link. So the data itself remains unchanged in the other one. There are a lot of rsync-based backup tools that do all this for you. RSnapshot is one of the better known ones, and it actually does all of this, including the hard link trees, all on its own without you needing to mess with it on a low level.
Well, the good news here is that my backups going forward are pretty well organized now. So this is just, I say backups, this was not automated stuff. This was chuck it on a USB hard drive and, oh, that's full, buy another one, put it in a drawer. And then I've just sort of copied them all onto this one ZFS pool, or actually two. This backups across both of them. It's a terrible, terrible mess. And I just want to kind of clean it up, get some space back, and then going forward, well, for the last year or two, I've been pretty organized with it. So I don't think any of my new backups are going to have much duplication in them. It's almost all just legacy stuff. So I think I need to just run it once and then job done, hopefully.
Yeah, so basically what you want to do here is you just want to get all of your legacy backup cruft, get it all into one data set to begin with so that hard links will actually work because you're not crossing a file system boundary. Then run rdfind again against it and tell rdfind to, hard link everything that it can. And that will be your deduping. Once it's done, everything will be deduped and you've just got your one legacy cruft backup data set and it's self-contained and you're good to go.
So you think hard link rather than symlink is the route I should go?
Yeah. Like Jim mentioned, it's less likely to end up with a symlink pointing to something that's not there anymore.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you delete the wrong quote copy unquote when you've done symlinks, then you've destroyed it everywhere. Whereas with hard links, as long as any one remaining hard link exists, then those blocks remain available and unchanged and yada yada. Moving back to what you actually need to do as far as deduplicating your stuff. So I'm looking at the rdfind man page right now, and it's really freaking simple. You'll apt install rdfind. Once you've done that, if we assume that your legacy backup stuff is, mounted at tank legacy backup, you would just say rdfind -make hard links tank/legacy backup. Done. It will go all through it. It will make hard links where duplicates existed. And, once it's done, you're done. Couldn't be much simpler. There is one thing, however, that we do need to cover that we haven't talked about yet. Before you run rdfind on those precious legacy backups, make sure you do have a backup somewhere else because that is a potentially dangerous operation. So make sure you can undo what rdfind did if you end up not liking it.
Yeah. So first, take a ZFS snapshot. This will mean you won't get any space back when you do the rdfind thing, but then you can delete the snapshot when you're sure that that's right. And yes, you want an actual backup, not just a snapshot before you do this. You know, these are your only backups of your backup, then you probably want to make sure they're safe.
Excellent. Well, sorry everyone for jumping the queue, but hopefully that was useful to someone else, not just me. We'd better get out of here then. Remember, show@2.5admins.com if you want to send your questions in. You can find me on Twitter @Joe Ressington.
I'm @JRSSNet.
And I'm @Alan Jude.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.